68, the Field of 68's bracket show. I'm excited to be here as your host tonight. My name is McKeon. I am from the Three Man Weave, and I have two of the best bracketologists with me in the entire world on planet Earth. We have Jonathon Warriner, the co-host of Making the Madness podcast, and a bracketologist for Making the Madness as well. You can find him at bracketologist3 on Twitter. And we have Lukas Harkins, Heat Check College Basketball's bracketology superstar at Hardwired Sports. Folks, check out Bracket Matrix. These guys are both up there in the standings. They're among the best we've got. We got a good show for you guys. We're going to talk about a little bit of reactions from this week compared to the top 16 reveal on Saturday. What has changed since that reveal? Any movers and shakers in the 16? Any new teams in that 16? Going to hit the essentials, go through the guys' one seeds, and of course the bubble, everyone's favorite topic, the bubble, the last four in, last four out. We also have some team hitters for later on in the show. Just a teaser, not going to give those teams away quite yet. And then, of course, we're going to hit your chat questions as well. So if you're in the YouTube channel right now, send those questions in, what teams you want us to cover, and we will hit them as we go along. So, fellas, starting off, Saturday, we saw the top 16 reveal from the almighty NCAA committee. This week, we saw Texas Tech. They picked up two more wins. We saw Tennessee fall on the road to Arkansas. Illinois just lost last night. I was at that game against Ohio State. UCLA lost to Oregon. Providence picked up two more wins. Lukas, over your Butler Bulldogs. We are sorry. And then Texas lost to Texas Tech. I'm going to start with Lukas. Do any of those results change anything for you in terms of, one, the top 16 as a whole, or maybe a shift within the top 16 from Saturday?
Actually, a bit of both. I didn't really have much of a shift with Texas Tech or Tennessee. Both stayed firmly on my three line. I did think that Texas Tech had a good chance to be over Duke at the bracket preview. Alas, that wasn't agreed upon by the committee, and I stuck with Duke on the two line this week because of how they had rated them at the bracket preview. Illinois I had on the 4 before the bracket preview, moved them to the 3, and then I just dropped them back to the 4 after last night in favor of Wisconsin. As far as the last 4 seed, that was up for grabs for me going into the preview. I thought that could have been Texas, could have been Houston. Turned out it was Texas, and I stuck with Houston on the 5 moving forward. But since Texas has lost, I actually reevaluating that 4 and 5 line, where I think there's probably all 5 of the teams that are my last 4, and all 4 of my 5s are in contention for that spot right now. I landed on UConn as my last 4. And they really leaped into there. I think their issue for much of the season was not having enough wins over teams that are projected to be in the tournament, and they've gotten them recently. I think they're up to 12-7 in quads 1 and 2, and they've got good metrics across the board. They've pretty quietly just kind of picked up all those wins, beat Nova this week, and they're right in that 4-5 mix, and I gave them the edge over teams like that's Houston I mentioned, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, and even Arkansas.
Jonathon, how about you? Do you agree with the UConn sliding into that top 16?
I moved Ohio State in there. I think it's neck and neck between those two, but obviously it's really close between those two teams. Went with Ohio State. You could certainly, I think, go with UConn. You could go maybe Houston. As for, I think there was a lot of movement between the 3 and the 4 line kind of throughout this week. I kept the same 1 and 2 seeds the committee had, but the 3 line, I originally had Wisconsin a little bit higher up than what the committee did, but obviously with them, continuing to win this week. First Tennessee lost, I moved Tennessee down to the 4 seed. Then Illinois loses, and now Tennessee, you're back to the 3 line, and Illinois is down the 4 line. So a little bit of shifting between the 3 and the 4 lines, but outside of that, I think it's still a situation. I think there's a clear top 15 teams. I want to say like UCLA is probably number 15 of those teams, but it's just kind of a little bit moving chairs between those teams.
Yeah, it's amazing how sensitive, right? You get these teams are so close together resume-wise that one win, one loss can cause a seismic shift, a whole seed line shift. At least right now, maybe as we go along these next couple of weeks, it gets a little bit clearer. We hope anyways. Conference tournaments coming up, always a great opportunity to get more quality wins. But let's hit the essentials now, guys. And I want you to hit me with your 1 seeds Had a little inertia, we'll say, the last couple of weeks. About the same four teams, I believe, in this conversation. So maybe no surprises here, but Jonathon, let's start with you. What are your 1 seeds as of today, February 25th?
Yeah, it's the same 4 1 seeds that it has been, but a little bit of a shift in terms of the order. Obviously, Gonzaga maintains number 1 overall seed. Committee clearly, I think is going to give Gonzaga that number 1 seed out west unless they lose a game upcoming here. So I think Gonzaga is pretty, firmly that number 1 overall team. I moved Arizona up, with Auburn losing. Arizona is now the number 2 overall 1 seed. I moved Kansas ahead of Auburn. So they're the 3, and then Auburn's the 4. Close race between kind of the last couple seeds. I think it's definitely, still a couple teams. I think Baylor and Kentucky with wins this weekend maybe could sneak into that 1 line. It's definitely close, but those, still the 4 number 1 seeds.
Lukas, any difference between the ordering of those 4 seeds or maybe a surprise team entering there?
No, I'm running with the same 4, same order, Gonzaga 1, and then moving Auburn down to that number 4 spot. Although I think the difference for me, maybe a little bit different than where Jonathan's at right now. I think at the bracket preview, they mentioned that the Arizona-Auburn grouping had a bit of an edge over Kansas between the 3 and the 4 spots on the number 1 line. And I think now that's switched. I think Kansas has an edge over Auburn. For the number 1, for the number 3 overall spot. And I think Auburn's not completely safe on the 1 line. Kansas has picked up a couple wins at West Virginia at home against Kansas State this week. Not awesome wins, but any win in the Big 12 this year is pretty seismic. Whereas I think Auburn, even with still a really great record, there are teams sneaking into the mix that could compete with them, that Baylor, Kentucky, especially, that could maybe reach onto that 1 line like Jonathon mentioned.
Yeah, Kansas, amazing. 16 quality wins right now for them. Head and shoulders, it seems, over the other 3 1 seeds. As most out there know, right, these teams are seeded priority in terms of which region they end up in, proximity to the city. What would it take for Arizona to take over Gonzaga for that number 1 overall seed, grab that number 1 seed in the West region, which could be important? You never know for fan base. Jonathon, do you think it can happen?
Not if Gonzaga wins out. If Gonzaga wins out, I think it's done. I think Arizona can win the Pac-12 tournament. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. I think the committee made it very clear they think Gonzaga is the number 1 overall team, and you just kind of look at the quality metrics, and that's kind of the thing they point to. Number 1 BPI, number 1 Kempop, number 1 Sagarin, number 1 the net. Like, they're running away with everything in terms of that. I don't think it's shifting unless, you mentioned like Gonzaga, they could lose to, they got a tough game against St. Mary's, could lose in the WCC tournament. But outside of that, I think they're pretty firmly number 1 overall seed.
Lukas, no rebuttals there?
No, I think Jonathan's spot on. Not even just number 1 in those quality rankings. They're so far ahead. Number 2, that simply saying number 1 almost doesn't cut it. Like, they're so far ahead that gives them the edge. And I think if the committee thought that Arizona's resume wasn't enough a week ago to be ahead of Gonzaga, it's certainly not going to be in a couple weeks, especially with Gonzaga's opportunities, which I think sounds a little twisted to some fans. But when you go at San Francisco and at St. Mary's, those are 2 really good games. They already beat San Francisco. They got St. Mary's up to end the regular season. That's really hard for Arizona to catch, and Gonzaga already has a huge edge in quality rankings. So unless Gonzaga purposely finds a way to play BYU and force them into the tournament with a loss, I think Gonzaga is going to stay on the 1 line.
If they play BYU.
If
they play BYU, that's right, yeah. Well, let's get into a little more intrigue here. And of course, I'm talking about the bubble, everyone's favorite subject. I want to start with Lukas here. And Lukas, I want you to give me your last 4 in. Who makes it past the cut line?
Just ahead of the cut line for me right now are Michigan, VCU, SMU, and Memphis. Both the last 2 American teams sneak in at the end. I think SMU might be a little bit tad low for me, but I think that just overall they've gotten in with that Houston win. Memphis has gotten in with that Houston win. SMU sneaks ahead of Memphis because they just won that head-to-head battle. I really like VCU from a resume standpoint. I know I'm maybe on a limb there compared to some others, But I think they've really improved recently. They're 6-6 in quads 1 and 2, 1 quad 3 losses, better than a lot of teams in the bubble right now. Resume metrics ranking in the mid 30s, which is awesome, especially when you think the committee puts a little bit more emphasis on those resume metrics for selection. Plus, they've just been way better with Ace Baldwin on the floor. Michigan is tough. I think their metrics across the board, they're 33rd in the net, inside the top 40 in resume metrics, inside the top 30 in quality metrics. 11 losses is brutal. And I think they're a team that could quickly slide out of the field with a loss or two. But their metrics certainly say they deserve to be in the field right now.
Yeah, if you have a team like Michigan, you're top 35 in both quality and resume, how do you lead them out of the field? Is there any justification to that, especially one in the Big Ten?
Only if they get to the point where they're like barely above 500.
500, yeah, okay. Good point. All right, Jonathan, let's see your last four in, see if you got any differences here. I assume you do from Lukas.
I got quite a bit of differences. I'll start off. North Carolina is my fourth last team in. They don't have like necessarily elite level wins, but it's good enough for them to be, last four in, going to Dayton. Just send them there. That's where we're going to send them. Memphis, they're my third to last team in. Got them in. Certainly losing to SMU, actually has SMU now moving into that fifth to last spot just because of the head-to-head. But Memphis, they're still last four in. San Diego State was a hard team to kind of keep out of the NCAA tournament field, especially when you look at their average quality metrics. 30th in BPI, an average of 27.3, 31st in the net. I just found that team kind of hard to leave out, so that's why I have San Diego State in. And then Oregon is my last team in. Move them in to the field with a win against UCLA. I just find it hard to kind of leave this team out. I know they just have been shellacked by certain teams this year, like California beat them handily, Arizona State beat them handily, BYU beat them handily, and BYU's on the bubble. So, I mean, they certainly, at times don't look like a tournament team, but at times they play UCLA and they sweep them. They already beat USC. They're going to play USC again. I think if they win that, I think it would be hard to leave Oregon out. They might just go out and win the Pac-12 tournament, and we don't even have to talk about them, but I have them as my last team in.
Educate me here. Does the almighty eye test still come into play here for the committee? Do they pull the eye test factor and put a team like Oregon, maybe if they caught a good game, maybe give them a bump in the field?
I think it's not like a thing that the committee is going to necessarily look at because there are so many games. I think, you have to look at the resume as a whole. But maybe with a team like Oregon, they look at, the recent results, they look at recent trends and say, all right, Oregon right now we think is playing, more so like a tournament team. You could certainly make the argument with one team Lukas mentioned earlier, like VCU, Ace Baldwin situation. You could see, all right, Ace Baldwin wasn't there early in the season.
Yep.
Now they're a different team. You could make that argument at Rutgers, but I certainly don't think it is something that the committee is going to make the top priority. If anything, it's the last case scenario.
All right, Jonathan, let's stick with you. You got to go last time, so you get to go first here. First four out. Look at the four teams that just missed the cut for you as of today, February 25th.
Yeah, first team out, VCU. It was kind of like a hard team to leave out just because you kind of have the situation. In terms of their resume, it's not overall fantastic, but when you point out that early this season, Ace Baldwin was out, that's a tough team to leave out. I have them just on the outside. I think they eventually sneak into the NCAA tournament. I could see a situation where they go out and don't even, leave it to death. I could see this team winning the Atlantic 10 tournament, and then they're in automatically. So we wouldn't even be talking about that. Indiana is another team. It's their record, or their like quad 1, quad 2 record isn't all that impressive. Not really impressive enough metrics. So I have them just out, but certainly a team I think, reasonably could be in the NCAA tournament field. Rutgers is out right now. I think that their road record was kind of something I looked at as being like, a situation where I think the committee could look at that road record. They could look at low net ranking, and it's just kind of hard to include that team. And then BYU is just kind of hanging around for now as the fourth to last team out.
BYU. What a shame. How the mighty have fallen. Just a couple weeks ago, we were talking about how well positioned they were for the tournament. And alas, it's college basketball. Lukas, your first four out. Who do you got?
So my first four out right now are Dayton, BYU, Oregon, and Indiana. Dayton's climbing up. I think that they had for a while not good enough quality metrics to really be in the mix. I will not say that the committee says that they put more emphasis on recent games. That hasn't been a criteria for several years. However, 5 straight wins by 17.5 points is going to do a hell of a good thing for your metrics. Dayton's in the mid-40s right now in quality metrics. They've gotten themselves into the bubble conversation there. They have a neutral site win over Kansas. They're 7-5 in quads 1 and 2 games, which is much better than a lot of teams in the bubble. 3 quad 4 losses is the absolute killer. And I think that there's room, but they've gotten close to the cut line here, where with at least 2 more quad 2 opportunities left on their schedule, 2 in the regular season before the A-10 tournament, they could improve those resume metrics enough to perhaps overload those bad losses, all of which came in their first 4 games of the year. BYU, we already talked about. I think that they're just kind of a very just middle of the road bubble team, 7-8 in quads 1 and 2. They have a quad 4 loss. Their metrics are all kind of in the middle. I'm certainly lower on Oregon than Jonathon is at this point. Nobody has made the NCAA tournament since advanced metrics have appeared on the team sheet. With a lower than 52 average in resume metrics. They're at 57 right now. Their quality metrics sit outside the top 52, 3 quad 3 losses. I think that they're just a little bit behind where Dayton is right now, just because their quality metrics are behind and they have a couple more losses than the Flyers. Indiana, kind of same thing with Jonathon. I don't really love Indiana's resume. I don't really think they're in great position, but they have a relatively clean resume without a quad 3 or quad 4 loss. But they've proven in quad 1 and 2 games they're going to win a third of the time. And I'm not sure that's really good enough to get there. Rutgers is my 5th team out, so very close to where Jonathon has them.
I'm rooting for Rutgers here. I always love a good underdog story, especially after such a brutal start to the year. But speaking of brutal starts to the year, and I want to transition here into a couple team hitters. The A-10 is fascinating to me. You have so many bubble teams. I know I'm rooting to see a Dayton, a VCU, maybe a St. Bonaventure, maybe even a SLU still in some crazy world, get into the tournament, assuming Davidson's in, by the way. Mm-hmm. So let's talk the A-10. Right now, you guys you both have Dayton and VCU right around there. Where do the Bonnies fall for you? Where does SLU fall for you? And let me get your prediction, and I know it's hard to do right now. How many teams ultimately get in from this league? Start with Lukas.
So funny you should mention that, as I just launched on my first 4 out by saying Rutgers is my 5th team out. Yes. St. Bonaventure is my 6th team out.
Look at them climbing.
They're right behind. As I mentioned with Oregon, with that resume metrics thing, St. Bonaventure's ahead of them. They have a top 50 resume average. They're 6-6 in quads 1 and 2, only 1 loss in quad 3. They're in pretty good shape. If you exclude the fact they're 82nd in the net and they're mid-70s in quality metrics. They're the kind of team, kind of like where Rutgers was a while ago, where you really just need to pick up some big wins, and I mean style points victories, where I think the Bonnies could probably climb if they're able to pick up a couple of those and move those quality metrics closer to the 50s than the 70s. So I think they're in the mix. I don't really see St. Louis really there. Yeah. Resume metrics closer to 70 is a tough spot to be in. 3-7 in quads 1 and 2, 2 bad losses. I'm not quite there with St. Louis. I think in the end, 3 A-10 teams get in. I think VCU is going to finish on the right side of the cut line enough where they don't need to win the A-10 tournament to get in. And I think that conference is just ripe for a bid stealer.
Plus, they deserve it, right? After last year, not getting to play in the tournament due to COVID. Come on.
Could be a factor.
Break. Maybe it could be a factor. Yeah, I don't see why. We're all humans. The committees is human as well. Maybe they think about that. So Jonathon, the Bonnies, are they close-ish to the field for you as well? Are they closer? Are they farther away? And also, I want to touch back on Dayton real quick. Those 3 Q4 losses, that's a real eyesore. I don't know what the record is for Q4 losses for an at-large team. It's 2.
too.
So it's unprecedented.
Arizona State 2019 had 2. I actually just posted an article on Dayton today.
Perfect.
Three teams in the last 2 years have made the NCAA tournament as an at-large with at least one quad 4 loss, and only 2 teams have made it with 2 quad 4 losses. Nobody has done it with 3 to this point.
So Jonathan, you have Dayton trying to be unprecedented by making the field. Bonnie's, where do you have them lined up?
I have them a little bit further out than where Lukas has them. It's just kind of hard to have a team a second than that. No, like necessarily. I guess they beat Marquette.
Where do you have
very handily. Hey, they have here's the thing, like signature victories. I kind of look at that. Rutgers has a lot of those, and St. Bonaventure doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of that. So that's kind of like a reason for St. Bonaventure being low. I could see a situation where like they go out and I don't know who they play in their upcoming schedule, but they win those games by 30 points each. And all of a sudden we're looking at, top 70 St. Bonaventure team, top 65 St. Bonaventure team. I could see that team like potentially being in the mix. But I still think it's probably going to be a situation similar with St. Louis where it's auto bid or bust when it comes to Atlantic 10 tournament team. Davidson is right there. I think they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. Maybe they get like a double-digit seed, but I think they're comfortably in. And then you mentioned it's Dayton, it's VCU. I think VCU ultimately, I would predict they end up getting into the NCAA tournament field. I think they'll move up, especially with the way the bubble has been going the past couple weeks. They're probably going to end up being like a 10 or 11 seed. And then Dayton, hey, if the way they're playing right now, they could go out and win the Atlantic 10 tournament. So I'll go with, I guess the over under probably 2.5 teams. I'll go over just to be fun. So
love it. Yeah. Let's shift to another mid-major dive real quick. 2 teams, both mid-majors, that have similar resumes. North Texas, all of a sudden top 40 KenPom North Texas, and Loyola Chicago, a team that might not win the Missouri Valley. They have a huge game with Northern Iowa coming up here. Lukas, where do you settle on the North Texas versus Loyola Chicago pecking order, first of all, on the S curve? Second of all, we have a question from our very own Jim Root, one of the hosts of the show. If North Texas were to take a loss in the Conference USA tournament or tournament final, would they be good enough to get an at-large bid?
So for one, I have North Texas and Loyola Chicago separated by nothing. They're right next to each other on my S curve.
Wow.
Loyola is my top 11. North Texas is my second 11. They're both right there. With regard to North Texas and the CUSA tournament, they feel a lot to me like I want to say 2019 Belmont. That's kind of, we keep talking about them for the last like 2 weeks leading into conference tournaments, that they're an at-large contender. They move into everyone's projected fields. That's not the case right now, but I think they'll get there. If they win out the regular season, a lot of people will have them on the right side of the cut line. And then if they lose in the CUS tournament, a lot of people will drop them out of their cut line. And then they'll be that kind of team that sneaks in that you forget about at the end. And I think that's more to do. You mentioned them as a top 40 KenPom team now. And while that's a bonus, I think it's more to do with the resume metrics, which are averaging 40.5 right now. They're 43rd in KPI, 38th in strength of record, 37th in the net. They don't have the quality wins that other teams have. They're 1-1 in quad 1. That's not many opportunities, but would you rather be 1-1 in quad 1 or 1-7 North Carolina?
It's always the question, right?
There's something opportunity. To say for that. Like North Carolina, like Indiana, 5-10 in quad 1 and 2. North Texas is 5-3. They just have a much better winning percentage in those games. Their strength of schedule is not going to be as high, and they have a quad 3 loss. Yep. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that their resume metrics are good. And if they lose in the CUSA tournament, what are the odds it's UAB, who would then probably be a top 50 net team? They're 51st right for now. That'd be a quad 1 loss, which wouldn't really hurt them that much. I think North Texas can afford a loss probably in the CUSA tournament, barring it's by UAB's hands.
Yeah. And Jonathan, we have a bit of precedence, right, with Belmont last year getting in as an at-large. Perhaps North Texas pulls a Belmont, gets an 11 seed if they end up losing in the conference tournament. Where do you have North Texas in comparison to Loyola Chicago? And are you confident in Loyola's ability, I guess, to get in at large if they fail to win the Missouri Valley?
I'm more confident in North Texas than I am in Loyola Chicago right now. I just think their quality metrics in terms of resume, like North Texas is ahead in everything, and that they're an average of 40.5, whereas Loyola Chicago, they're behind 52. I know Loyola ranks a little bit ahead, but they also have had more opportunities. They've taken more losses, and just kind of looking at this team, you look at these two teams, Loyola Chicago 21-6, and North Texas 19-4. Less games, of course, mostly because North Texas played a lot of D2 exhibition games kind of in their regular schedule. But right now, I would take North Texas's resume over Loyola Chicago. I have North Texas on the 11 line. I have Loyola Chicago on the 12 line.
Yeah, and I guess you look at resume versus quality. Resume averages better for North Texas. Quality averages better for Loyola. As you say, the committee selects teams based on resume, right, and then seeds them based on quality. I've paid attention to the show. I know what you bracketologists do. Guys, let's transition here. Actually, you know what? No, one more team. Sorry, we have to hit on this. We talked about UConn just a little bit, but I think Lukas, you wanted to go maybe more in depth on them because they've been firing up right now. You have them as a 4 seed right now. What do you make of UConn?
I talked about it a little bit when I was mentioning how they got onto the 4 line, but I think the biggest deal for me was about 2 weeks ago, end of January. They were sitting at, not even that, 2 weeks ago, mid-February. They were sitting February 11th, 16-7, 7-5 in the Big East, and their only wins over tournament teams at surefire tournament teams, which does not include VCU, who's in my field, but is in the overall bubble on the outside of the bracket matrix. Their only wins were over Marquette twice and Auburn once in double overtime, but still a win. Those are good wins, but there aren't many. There's 3 over the projected field, and 2 of them are over the same team. And then they just went and beat Seton Hall at home, Xavier at home, and Villanova at home, and all of a sudden that number is 6. And VCU's playing much better. Where I think that Connecticut's really jumped in a hurry. They're top 20 in every single team sheet metric. That is across the board top 20. They range from 16 to 20 in all of them. They're now 5-6 in quad 1, which isn't awesome, but it's definitely on par with other teams in the 4 to 5 seed range. No losses in quads 3 or 4, 12-7 in quads 1 and 2, which is the same record Villanova has. It's 2 more wins than Tennessee has in that same area. They've jumped into that category where I think they're definitely a mix for a protected seed.
Yeah, they're a team that I can see losing in the first round because they tend to play stupid sometimes, but also a team that can make it far due to their talent. I mean, it's overwhelming, right? They've so much size. It's intimidating jumping off the bus, those guys. But enough on UConn. I've talked about UConn so much. I want to go to the chat questions. We have a few here. Starting off, Marshall asks about UNC. Where do you guys have UNC? Are you confident in their ability to make the tournament? That one Q1 win. I know one of you guys had them on your bubble, but Jonathon, let's start with you. That one Q1 win kind of makes me nervous, and if I was a UNC fan, I'd be a little bit scared about the rest their tournament chances.
Yeah, I would definitely be scared about the tournament chances. Especially like the rest of their schedule outside the Duke game, which I'm already marking that up as a loss for them. I don't think they're winning their final game or Coach K's final game in Cameron Indoor. No disrespect, but yeah, it's going to be tough sledding. I think they're going to need to maybe once they get to the ACC tournament, win a couple games in the ACC tournament. It all depends kind of on matchups, but let's say they get a Virginia Tech, then they get a Wake Forest, and maybe that ends up being their bracket. They could, potentially make a run to the ACC championship, and we're not even talking about North Carolina as a bubble team. Right. So, I think that's going to play as big of a factor just because the rest of the regular season doesn't really provide them many reasonable opportunities.
Yeah, Lukas, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I wrote about North Carolina this week. I think they're definitely probably the most polarizing resume in the country because I think that they're my 5th to last team in, and I honestly absolutely think they should be in the tournament. And I think that that's probably crazy talk to a lot of people. But precedent is right on their side. Every team that has ever ranked, okay, I say that like it's been more than 2 years, but every team over the last 2 years with metrics on the team sheet that's been top 45 in resume and quality metrics has made the tournament. They're currently top 37 in both, and I think there's a lot of talk about one quad 1 shouldn't make the tournament. 3 at-large bids did last year.
Yep, and Houston's got 0. right?
Lafayette has more.
Not a tournament team.
Yeah, Lafayette's got the Q1 win at Rutgers. That's right. I think you answered this actually, Lucas, on my first show I did with you. Ron asks, what do you think is the best metric system? Committee, I think, considers them equal. Is that correct when they look at the team sheet?
Well, at least that's what they say publicly.
That's what they say. Right. What do you think? Do you think that that's not the case?
No, I don't know. I think I've gone on record this season. I think BPI is the worst. I think that Mountain West is going to come back on Sunday and wish the Mountain West didn't exist with a lot of those teams, Colorado State, Wyoming, most importantly. This is probably a hot take. I think the net probably does the best job overall of doing a summary of everything. I think everything needs to be taken in context. And I'm glad there's 6 metrics on the team sheet because there are outliers that just don't make a whole lot of sense overall. But I think when you generally look at it, if you average the other 5 metrics together, you're getting pretty close to net an awful lot of the time. I certainly wouldn't take one metric over all of the rest, but I think the net probably does the best job of equaling out the balance between resume and quality. And I think there needs to be that balance.
Jonathan, let's shift to San Francisco. Question from Timothy. Where do you have them in your tournament? And do you think they're safe relatively if they were to, let's say they lose first round to a BYU or a Santa Clara in the WCC tournament? Would you still feel good about them making it as an at-large? And where do you have them right now today?
Right now, I have them as a 10 seed. I think they're comfortably in right now, especially the 8 combined Q1, Q2 wins. The record's not as great as you would like as a WCC team. I think they maybe could have picked up another win here or there, and they feel pretty, really safe right now. But 29th in the net, that's going to be hard to leave a team that's top 30 in the net. So I think if they're top 30 in the net, they don't lose to San Diego or let's say they play BYU in the first round of the WCC tournament and they win that game. Like, I don't think they're even sweating it. I think they're just going to be probably like a 10 seed in the NCAA tournament and potential team that maybe pulls off a 10 versus 2 upset.
Lukas, I want San Francisco in my tournament. I want the Dons. I want them.
They're on my 9 line. I think they're in pretty good positioning. They're 3-5 in quad 1. I think as Jonathon mentions 8-7 in quads 1 and 2, but that 3-5 is a little bit sneaky because they have a neutral site win over number 51 UAB, which is really close to being a quad 1 win. But I think overall, there's a lot of bubble teams that are like way under 500 against quality competition and have played 15-ish games. San Francisco's played 15-ish games in quads 1 and 2, and they're above 500 in those games. They have good metrics across the board. I think that they're going to get in barring a disaster, like losing at San Diego, for instance, which is their upcoming.
Don't lose to San Diego.
Real quick, is Davidson a lock for the tournament, even if they lose in the A10 tournament? Lukas,
I wouldn't say anyone's a lock that's sitting 9 or lower right now, particularly in a mid-major, ACC included.
Wow.
Just because there aren't really any opportunities that aren't Duke in the ACC that aren't like
down here.
I don't mean that as a slight against the ACC, but it's definitely a slight against the ACC.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Davidson's in pretty good shape overall. I think they're definitely in the best position of any A10 team. I think I've hit on this in the past year. I really love the idea and the historical precedent that the committee tends to select teams based on resume and seed them based on quality. And right now is.
Did we lose Lukas?
I'll continue on Davidson.
Continue it, Jonathon. Go.
They play Fordham. They play George Mason. Don't lose those 2 games.
Yeah.
I feel pretty confident they're going to be in this NCAA tournament. Don't lose to Fordham, though. And George Mason, it's not as bad of a loss, but it's still not a good loss to take.
Just don't do it. Just don't do it, Davis.
Just make it easy on us. Just win those 2 games, and we're not even talking about Davidson being on the bubble. So
yeah, it gets easier at that point. Yeah. Lukas, welcome back. Let's talk 2 seeds real quick here with specifically Texas Tech. Can they move up to the 2 seed line? Are they already there after what they just did? And Tennessee, can Tennessee move up to the 2 seed line? Jonathon, what do you think?
I think Texas Tech is much more likely. They're currently ahead. They also, like, if it's a tiebreaker between Texas Tech and Tennessee, the committee made it kind of clear when they were talking on the bracket reveal. Head-to-head matchups could be used as a tiebreaker. So that's, something to look out for. But yeah, I think Texas Tech is certainly there. I think if, they finish strong, I could see them, maybe, Purdue loses this game. I think there's teams that kind of need to falter a little bit for Texas Tech to fall. I think, if the 1 and 2 seeds all went out, which I don't know if that's actually mathematically possible, they're not going to jump to that, but they're certainly, I think, that pretty clear. Like, if there were 5 2 seeds, Texas Tech would be the 5th 2 seed.
Lukas, Bryant is probably going to win the NEC tournament. That's just my 2 cents. What seed does Bryant get if they win the NEC tournament? Do they stay out of Dayton? They stay out of that first 4 for you?
Not right now. They're my last.
16.
They're my third 16 seed. So that would be sitting in the first 4 in Dayton. But I think that they're close to that. They're in that same mix, kind of with the Norfolk State, Cleveland State, UNC Wilmington are all in that mix that I think are right there to potentially stay out of Dayton or be in Dayton if they win the conference tournament.
Yeah. All right, let's go to games to watch this weekend, guys. Obviously, a lot of opportunities in play with 146 games or whatever we have on Saturday. Always these massive slates on Saturday. Just make it a little bit more even, guys.
Play Friday games.
Play Friday games. Why not? There's like 10 games today. I want to mention a couple here. So in the Big 12, TCU's hosting Texas Tech. Now, I had a personal question, but I looked at their resume closer and I kind of answered it. Jonathon, TCU, pretty safe, I would say, for the tournament currently.
I'd say currently, but again, their upcoming schedule, I think
it's brutal, right?
Yeah, they've got Texas Tech, obviously. If they win that game, I'm going to go ahead and just give TCU a bid. You're locked in. But that's certainly a very losable game. Then they play Kansas not once but twice. I think if they get one of those wins against Kansas or get the Texas Tech win, I think at that point they're in the NCAA tournament. But it gets really tricky if they lose all 3 of those games. You play West Virginia. Even if you beat West Virginia, you're not going to have like necessarily what I would call a signature win against one of the top 3 teams in the Big 12, or I guess even the top 4 teams, because they've been swept by Texas. They've been in this scenario, they get swept by Kansas, they get swept by Texas Tech, they get swept by Baylor. I could see the committee being like, all right, you had 8 opportunities against the top 20 teams in the Big 12, and you don't even get one of those. Maybe we're not putting you in the field. So I think they need to feel safe, get one of those wins.
Lukas, committee doesn't really look at conference record, obviously, but 6-12 in the Big 12, 7-11 in the Big 12. Does that do anything for you for TCU?
It doesn't really change anything for me. I think if they get to that point, though, they're going to be really happy they had that LSU home win in mid-January.
Ooh, that's a good point. That was a big win, turns out. Hopefully LSU can kind of pick it back up after they faltered a little bit. Virginia Tech and Miami, guys. Obviously, the ACC we just talked about.
You could not have named 2 more completely opposite resumes.
In terms of one is good at resume, one is good at quality,
and vice versa. Yeah, they are extremely polar opposites.
How would a win impact both teams? Would Virginia Tech? I mean, can they even get there? If they win this, they're what, in the first 8 out?
Yeah, I think that's right. They've been in consideration for me as just do I put them in the first teams out strictly because their quality metrics are already there? It's just a matter of if they can actually win the games, which is obviously should be the point, and
right.
They haven't done that. And they've been rolling as of late, but I think they're going to need to win out the rest of the regular season. So that's at Miami, Louisville at home, and at Clemson. And I say that in part because of what I was mentioning earlier. Duke's really the only awesome win in the entire ACC. Everything else is, quite frankly, the second best win in the ACC by net is Virginia Tech.
That's wild, right?
They're 40th in the net. That's the second best win in the conference, which is incredible. And I think that that's part of the issue for a team like Virginia Tech. is that they don't really have those wins. They're 0-5 in quad one. They're ranked in the mid 70s in quality metrics. And if they're going to need to pick up those wins, the only chances they're going to have is they're going to have at Miami this weekend. And then the conference tournament, of which there are only 3 teams that qualify as quad one. That's Duke, North Carolina, and Wake Forest.
That's brutal.
So like they aren't really going to have a whole lot of opportunities there. Although if they get North Carolina at some point in the tournament, that could become one of the biggest games of all of conference tournament.
Mm. A good question popped up in the chat. So I want to mention these other 2 games to watch. Guys, USC at Oregon's obviously huge. Nice. Oregon is right in the bubble, as you guys both said. The AAC has really huge games coming up. Wichita and Memphis on Saturday. Memphis is right in that bubble as well. SMU is playing Houston. Got to think SMU gets into the field, or at least feels better about it if they get that win. Houston,
when they win it.
When they win.
Houston
tumbling down to, 6th seed maybe? I don't know. SMU probably not a terrible loss, but they haven't been as pristine lately, we'll say, of the Cougars. But I want to close with this from Noah here, because we just saw Ryan Nembhard, Jonathon, get hurt for Creighton. Disgusting broken wrist injury. Gross. Had to look away. Does the committee take into account late season injuries like this? Sort of projecting a team, I suppose. If Creighton were to lose these next couple of games without Nembhard in the lineup, would they say, this is not the same team, and write him off?
I think it's kind of the way they lose, to be honest. Like if they're in, let's say, I think they have 3 games left. Let's say they're in all 3 games and the results just go the other way and they don't really falter too much in the quality metrics. Like I still think Creighton, with the resume they have, I think still gets in. But if, let's say, they go out and they just look completely in shambles, that could be a situation where the committee is like, all right, this is clearly a different team without Ryan Nembhard. I don't know if they leave them out, but that's certainly the situations the committee could end up doing. We'll see if, obviously Creighton needs to play those 3 games. Maybe they go out and they win at Providence tomorrow, and we're not even talking about this. So,
Lukas, anything to add on that? Late season injuries?
Yeah, I don't think it should affect selection. I think what Creighton has done has earned a selection to the NCAA tournament. As far as their seeding, I currently have Creighton up to the 9 line as of their most recent games, but I think I could see them falling down a seed line or 2 because of the injury. I was a child when this happened, but a la Kenyon Martin.
I was Cincinnati just thinking about that. Yep.
Seed line. I could see Creighton. I don't think it should impact their selection. Whether or not it does, I don't know. I don't think it should impact their selection, but it could impact their seeding. Because I think that they're going to select teams based on what they've earned. And Creighton, I think, has earned an NCAA tournament bid. And I think Ryan Nembhard has earned to see his team in the NCAA tournament too. And I think that perhaps the committee will say, well, they aren't really as good as their resume says, and we'll drop them to a 10 or 11. But I think they should make the field still.
Well put, well said. Good closing for the show. Thank you, everyone out there, for joining us for Fielding the 68. We're back on Monday. Every Monday and Friday, we're coming to you, updating you on the field of 68. Very aptly named show. Reminder, the entire seed list, the full bracket from our 4 bracketologists, Lukas, Rocco, Jonathon, and Andy, will be tweeted out after this show. Get a fresh look at the bracket. It's more accurate than everybody else. Come on, Field of 68. We'll see you next time at 5 p.m. Central on Monday. Have a great weekend.